I'm Lisa Goldberg, and welcome to the Well-Fed Mind Summit. I'm here today with Viki Thonley. Viki is a mindful wellness therapist, a meditation teacher, and an eating disorder specialist. Welcome, Viki, and great to have you here.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm very, very happy to be here and spend this time with you and everyone.
Oh, good. We're going to have an exciting discussion today. We're going to talk about the mind-body connection and the food-mind-body connection and how stress affects our food choices. So before we get into that, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into the work that you do.
I think like many of us who get into helping professions, we have some kind of personal experience that takes us on a particular inner growth and journey for ourselves that we want to share with others. So I'm no exception to that. When I was about 15, I developed bulimia nervosa, and it stayed around for a good 18 years before I was able to actually work through all of the stuff that needed to be worked through for me to be able to get to a point where I could say I am recovered. And I can very happily say that now I am recovered. But all of that experience of going through an eating disorder and having to get to know myself, having to learn to trust my body again and encourage my body to learn to trust me again, it was quite an interesting education for me. There wasn't a lot of help, there wasn't a lot of support out there in the way that I needed it, and it really felt like it was up to me to go and learn these things about how my mind and body worked and how stress influenced and impacted my food choices, and really understanding what was I really hungry for, what was the major factor or several underlying factors that were driving me to use food and to feel better in my skin. Which I think, unfortunately, for a lot of people these days, particularly women, it's a very difficult thing to feel comfortable in your own skin.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit more about that, about the relationship with yourself and what that reveals about what really drives you to eat and perhaps what you really might be hungry for that's obviously not food.
Well,
Can
I
you
always
talk
believe,
about that?
yeah, I always believe that the relationship we have with ourselves is reflected in our relationship with food and everything else, really. So if we have a difficult time with food, and we might be using food to distract us, satiate us, comfort us, or any other thing that we're using it to do, then it's a sign that something's not quite right with how we view ourselves, with our own self-esteem, with our own confidence, with the way that we talk to ourselves, what we see and say to ourselves when we look in the mirror, for example. So I think having a good look at the relationship you have with yourself can really unveil a lot of issues that might be coming up in other areas of your life, whether it be self-judgment, whether it be focusing on dieting and getting further and further into that cycle of restriction, deprivation, and not allowing yourself to fully show up and enjoy life and enjoy food and enjoy everything else that is a part of your life.
Yeah, let's dig a little bit deeper to that because I kind of feel like so many women are so critical of themselves and they're their own worst critics, and they just, some of people when they use food just on the inside just feel terrible about themselves, and they don't trust themselves to succeed in creating the changes because I know, and I'm sure you know, in the work that you do and the work that I do with the clients that I work with, people are so desperate to change, and they think about changing, well, if I eat this or I follow this diet, and they change the food. Can you talk a little bit about where one starts when they kind of really don't like themselves to start to change that? How does that process begin?
How does the process begin to change that way that they view themselves, or where does that start?
Where does it start? Or where's it, sometimes I think people just don't know where to start. People are aware that they're their own worst self-critics.
Yes.
And, probably just from, information that they read, they know more needs to change than the food. And the relationship with themselves is really where it needs to start because, the relationship with the food is really kind of secondary. How does one begin the process of changing the relationship with themselves, I suppose, is the question. And I know it's in depth, but what's a good place where people might be able to look inward and start?
I think definitely learning to be honest with yourself. And to
Mhm.
be honest with ourselves, we really have to tune into what are we thinking? What do we believe about ourselves? What are the limiting beliefs or the constant self-talk pieces that are coming from the mind and influencing how we feel? Because our thoughts influence our feelings, and then our feelings influence our behavior. And all of that is derived from our subconscious mind and the beliefs that we hold about ourselves. So when I say beliefs and values, what I'm talking about and referring to are the beliefs that are programmed into our very impressionable child minds when we're between the ages of 2 and 7. So if things are not so easy when we're that age, or even if we do have a very privileged upbringing, for example, it doesn't really matter where we begin in life, but it's the people that we're surrounded by, the messages that we are interpreting as truth for us. So, for example, if a young child is watching mum and dad have an argument and observing how they handle their stress, how they handle their emotions, their anger, and how they talk to each other and communicate or not communicate, then sometimes because our primary language as children is emotion, sometimes we are feeling that intense emotion mostly for the first time as children, and we're trying to figure out what does this mean. And because as children our basic human needs are to have food, shelter, clothing, and love, we want to know that we're safe. We want to know that we have that safety. And if mum and dad are arguing and we're observing this, but we're not getting any opposing messages to let us know that it's okay, this is what humans do. Sometimes adults, they get stressed and they don't know how to handle it very well, but it doesn't mean it's your fault. For a child who may not have that reinforcement of that opposing perspective, or even just another perspective from their own, they will look at it very selfishly, and they will take it in as, what's this mean to me? Or, did I do it? Is it my fault? And sometimes these, even though the brain's trying to find a logic over the emotions that we experience as children, it doesn't mean that the logic it comes up with is actually truth. But for children, it's very real in that moment. And if left unattended to, then we grow into adults carrying these beliefs about ourselves that can do a lot of damage when we get older, and show up in our lives with our relationship to ourselves, with our relationship to other people, with our ability to go out there and make the most of our opportunities. And it really gets muddled up with our fears of success, our fears of failure, our fears of not being good enough, our fears of not having anything of value to contribute. And that's very much tied into our self-esteem and who we are. So just to give you an example that may relate to a lot of people who are watching and listening, I had one particular client who, when she was 11, she was absolutely in love with gymnastics. She loved gymnastics. And I had taken her through just a gentle guided relaxation and asked her a couple of questions to remember when it changed from being fun to when it changed to something she was afraid of. And it all came back to this one pivotal moment when she was 11, and an adult had asked her at gymnastics class, what would you like to be when you grow up? And her 11-year-old self said, I want to be a gymnast. And this adult had said to her, oh, you're too fat to be a gymnast. No, you'll have to choose something else. From that day on, her relationship to herself changed, because at 11 she didn't know that it was just an opinion from the other adult, that it didn't make it truth. At 11 she didn't know that she could disagree with the adult and say, well, thank you very much for your opinion, but I disagree. I can do anything I want with my life. So it was at that moment, that very influential moment, that something had triggered the perspective she had of herself that was tied up in her self-esteem and her own self-worth, and it changed, and she started looking at herself differently. She started comparing her body to all the other girls in gymnastics class, and it became such a difficulty for her that she quit gymnastics, and she took and removed a lot of fun and purpose that she had created for herself. She removed it out of her life because she felt unworthy, because she thought she was too fat, because that was the message she was given. And that did lots of damage to create anorexia nervosa for a large part of her life.
that's really powerful. And so I want people to hear how even one incidence like that, a lot of times people think it's something that, from childhood on that was in the family and was kind of like perpetuated over the course of years is kind of really how it starts. And that is one way.
Yeah,
But
but
it
not
could
for
be,
everybody.
yeah, but an incident just like that one incident made such an emotional impact
Yes.
on this young girl that it carried her with the rest of her life that she felt unworthy. And so that's when you say to start telling yourself the truth and limiting beliefs is that she grew up with this limiting belief that she couldn't be a gymnast
Yeah.
because of what this one person said. And to start to tell herself as an adult that this isn't true. And, if she knew then what she now knows, none of that is the truth. And it's just a belief that, you know, to change her story, to move on and get away from that.
Mm.
So, that's really powerful and it's hard for a lot of people to do, but it's a great starting place where people could start to tell themselves the truth about what they thought when they were younger and stand kind of in their power right now as an adult and just be like, that's an old story and that's not true.
That's right. That's right. It's not so much always about telling the truth to ourselves, it's actually about discovering it. Because as adults, we have carried lots of things from our childhood, all the conditioned beliefs and responses and programmed thinking that makes us react or respond in certain ways. And it's not until we actually see that the choices that we're making are perhaps unhealthy and unwise and are doing ourselves damage, that, or if we developed some sort of illness or disease or something really challenges us, that we suddenly think, I really need to change. It's time to change. I need to do something now. And that's when they start inquiring about, well, how? And I find that that's the most difficult thing for a lot of people is they know, logically they may understand, I need to change. The choices I'm making are unhealthy for me. I'm using food in a very unhealthy way and I'm suffering the consequences of that daily. Then, okay, how? How do I change? And a lot of it has to do with how our brain works. Consciously, we may understand and logically understand why we need to change and that it's something we need to do for ourselves. But often we approach change with the conscious thought of, I want to change, I want to do this, I want to do that. And a lot of the time, for example, people say, I want to lose weight, I want to get healthier, so I'm going to join a gym, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And that's all very well and good. But unfortunately, because of the emotional experiences we may have had in the past, that is tied to very intense feelings that are linked to thoughts and beliefs surrounding those experiences. Sometimes when we try to make change, we will put things in motion and we will get so far. And because our subconscious mind hasn't been consulted, and because our conscious mind has 95 or so% control over what we are thinking and feeling and doing, we've got a very measly 5% conscious ability to make change, which doesn't really give us everything that we need to complete that change and make it long lasting. So when we try to make change, most people ignore the underlying subconscious mind that is running the show, and they will consciously make these choices. They'll get to a point where the subconscious mind is noticing that this isn't really quite the reality that we believe is right for us. And it will slip some thoughts and feelings in there that will have us questioning and doubting ourselves. And therefore, we might think that we have no willpower. We might think that it's too hard. We will find ways and reasons why we don't make the healthy choices, why we didn't go to the gym, why we didn't go for an exercise, or why we didn't show up for ourselves that day. And really, it's coming back to the subconscious mind. If you want to create change, you have to ask yourself, what do I believe about the change that I want to make? Because if we are holding beliefs about ourselves that are negative and programmed to keep us in a state of being or reality that we think is our lot in life, that we think is where we should be, then no amount of trying to force change outside of that without getting the subconscious mind on board and aligning what you say you want to do with, if you believe you deserve to have that, or if you believe you're smart enough or good enough or worthy of it, no amount of trying to force it will actually make it stick. There will come a point where we will get to and then not be able to get beyond that because the subconscious mind doesn't align that as reality to what we believe is true for us. So that's really what I'm referring to when I say our truth, is discovering our truth for ourselves. And just because our subconscious mind might be holding a belief from childhood doesn't mean that it was necessarily true when we were a child when we formed it, because we were operating from very naive and very immature functionings to try and come up with that logic. It's asking yourself now, what do I believe now about what I say I want to do? What do I believe about myself now? How well do I like myself? What are the negative thoughts that I know I consistently say to myself that make me feel a certain way, that end up in me turning to food or to other means of addictions or behaviors to help get me through? So it's really pulling it all back and going to the core of, well, who am I? Who am I? Do I like who I am? And do I believe that I'm worthy and deserving of having everything that I want to have? So it's a very
Right.
interesting, conversation when you start talking about the brain and how it works, so that people can realize it's not about not having any willpower. It's not about you not being good enough, or that you consistently self-sabotage. It's about, well, what do you believe? Who are you?
Yeah, and self-sabotage is a big one because a lot of people start on a good path and they start to feel good,
Mm.
and all of a sudden it could be fear, it could be I don't deserve to continue to feel good, but then there's some kind of self-sabotage that goes on and they kind of take a few steps backwards. And a lot of times that really, prohibits people from moving along the path. And so I think self-sabotage comes from so many different places in your life. And, you know, I think a good point is for people to kind of really realize what they're doing when they're doing it at the point where, and perhaps, you could speak a little bit about this. When they see some, themselves sabotaging themselves and they're going backwards, is there something that should, you know, an awareness that should be created where they could, kind of stop it in its tracks or before they go back too far?
Absolutely. And this is where we have conscious awareness coming into play. And as I mentioned before, we've got, based on neurons firing, we have a certain percentage of conscious control and awareness to our subconscious mind, which is storing all of our beliefs and values and past experiences. And the brain does that every night. It sort of unpacks the day and then sorts short-term memory, long-term memory, and things that we need to remember, compartmentalizes it, ready so it can start again the next day. And when we're talking about the way that the brain works, we have approximately around 5% conscious awareness or control of our thinking and our choices, and the remainder is subconscious or unconscious. So when you look at it that way and you consider for a moment that we have approximately anywhere between 60 to 70,000 thoughts a day, and it's estimated that about 90% of those thoughts are negative, and then about 80 to 85% of the thoughts that we're thinking today are the same thoughts that we were thinking yesterday. So that's a lot of negative thinking that is consistently being churned out by the subconscious mind that we are just going through the motions of every day. So it leaves us with a very, very small window to make consistent conscious change. But we know that the brain can be changed and it can absolutely be done. It means that you're going to have to put a little bit of effort in, but for the reward of being able to change an unhealthy behavior by getting to the root underlying belief behind it that's driving all of that negative thinking, so that you can have long-lasting change, it's worth it. It's worth it to do that and to give yourself that best opportunity of having the life that you really want. So one of the ways that I help my clients do that is we actually write down all of their negative beliefs, depending
Mm-hmm.
on what the focus might be for them. If it is food or diet or relationships or whatever it might be, I might give them a word and ask them to write down everything that they believe about it. And this is a really powerful exercise because generally once we bring our mind to it and we start thinking of what are the things that I consistently say to myself about this topic that I'm trying to change, we usually can become quite aware of all of that negative thinking because we're focused on it. And sometimes we end up with a big, huge, long list of negative statements about ourselves. And that's a really great place to start because then you can see, well, if I'm saying this stuff to myself consistently in my head that I'm mostly largely unaware of, then now I can see why I'm feeling and making the choices I am, because it's right in front of me. But most of the time this is going on up in my head without my conscious awareness, and it's running the show. So maybe it's not me. Maybe it's not that I don't have willpower. Maybe it's not that I'm a bad person or I can't stick to anything. Maybe now I understand how my brain works and what I'm actually saying to myself every single moment of the day. Now I can get busy actually asking, is this true for me? Is it true to who I am now? Is it relevant to the kind of person that I am or I know I want to be? Or is it just something that I believed when I was a child, that I created when I was a child, or I created when I was younger? Whether it was from a very simple statement that did a lot of emotional damage, or whether it was from consistent, repetitive observation of certain behaviors that were consistently reinforced, whether it was from a child in the schoolyard who said something to make all the other kids laugh at my expense, and I interpreted it a certain way. Perhaps as an adult, we can challenge these negative thoughts that we identify we are saying to ourselves that are grouped together to an underlying belief, so that we can actually ask ourselves, is that really true? It may have been true when I was a child, when it occurred, or when I started feeling that way. Maybe it wasn't true, but I didn't know any better to question it in a different way. But now as an adult, I can take responsibility for how I feel, and I can choose if that is now going to run my life for the rest of it, or if it's been running the show long enough and it's time to step up and be responsible. So then what I get my clients to do is pick one, challenge it, pull it apart, find reasons and examples why it's not true, so that you can start to break it down and take away the validity of that statement. And it takes away the power of the statement. And then I ask them to rewrite that belief or rewrite that self-talk. So cancel it out, put a line through it, and rewrite it. What would you like to say to yourself in that moment instead? What would be a more empowering or positive, encouraging statement to help support you in feeling or being what you want to be feeling or being instead? And then the next and most important key is conscious, consistent action. And it generally takes between 21 and 40 days to make that new connection in the brain. But what we're talking about here is if we have a default pathway of negative thinking going this way, and that's all the negative statements that we're saying that are keeping us stuck in a certain reality and not where we want to be healthy and happy and confident in our body. And we want to change it to another way. What I get my clients to do once we've done the awareness of writing down those statements, cancelling them out for preferred statements instead, is I say to them, anytime you hear yourself saying those things, that you hear that negative statement, that little negative voice in the back of your mind saying you can't eat that, no, you haven't done enough exercise today, no, you have to wait, that's too much, then anytime you hear the negative things, to either clap your hands, click your fingers, or say out loud, stop, come into the moment. And what you're doing is you're getting out of your head and you're coming into a conscious awareness. You can even think of it as coming out from, dropping from your head down to your heart, coming into the moment, being mindful and being consciously aware of, okay, I know I'm thinking that, but is it true? It's not true. I've already gone through the process. So what is the statement I want to replace it with? And start repeating that statement over in your mind. And because we can consciously only focus on one thought at a time, the rest are all lined up there ready to come one after the other. We notice it very easily when it comes to negative thinking. One negative thought can just start an avalanche of negative thinking, and we get stuck and pulled down into that negative low state of tension and tightness and stress. But if we can change that just from that one thought, stop it, bring into the moment, change the thought to our preferred pathway, then consistently, consciously over time, we will stop going down that pathway and we will start creating a new pathway of conscious thought. And so we change our default thinking pattern from this to that one, because this one we're not using as much anymore. We're catching it before we actually go down there, and we're learning to create a new pathway that is conscious and where we want to be, because we want to feel differently and behave differently.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, writing it down, because first of all, when you write it down and you see it in black and white, there's kind of no denying it. It's out of your head and it's on paper for your brain to see, through your eyes, so you kind of really absorb it versus it just stays up here.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
love where you say, snap your fingers, clap your hands, and say stop, because there's so many people who are in that moment, and I almost feel like this will like wake them up because they all feel like they can't, they're all like, it was in that moment, and they wake up somehow after they've eaten what they would wish at after the moment that they didn't eat. So snapping your fingers or clapping your hands brings you to full consciousness.
Mm.
And so let's talking about being in the moment. So we want to make, the mind body food connection. Let's talk a little bit about, stress and eating and the mind, and how sometimes the mind can actually, or your subconscious mind can actually rule your food choices.
Mm. Well, there's a lot of different things here. There's a lot of different things that come into play. Stress these days is known as the number one underlying cause of all illness and disease. So we know that stress is very prevalent in modern day society. How well are we handling stress though? Most of us are just simply going through the motions. We're getting caught up in the stress response. We're having our stress response activated several times a day, but we're not actually countering it with enough relaxation and rest and activities that actually can bring us back into ourselves. So most of the time, the demands of daily life, the expectations we place upon ourselves, our work, family, balance, everything that we think we have to adhere to and stick to and get done on our never-ending to-do list is creating stress for us. But what I find is that a lot of people are very out of touch with what stress means to them. It's very easy to say, I'm so stressed, this is really stressful, I'm so stressed out, you're stressing me out. It's very easy to say that, but I always ask my clients and students, what do you really mean when you say that? What is another way for you to understand what you say, what you mean when you say I'm stressed? So then we can get to frustrated, overwhelmed, knot in my tummy, ache and pain in my neck and shoulders, never having enough time to myself. So what we're actually doing by explaining what stress means to an individual is getting to the real discomfort or dis-ease underneath in the mind and the body. And when you understand what stress means for you, then you have a better understanding of what you're really yearning for to make yourself feel better. Now, food comes into play there because we're human beings. We're creatures of pleasure. We like fun and pleasure and creativity, but unfortunately, in modern day life, we're too busy. We're too busy to put time aside to enjoy the things that bring us relaxation and fun and creativity. So we often get stuck. We often get stuck in the doing and the being for everybody else and not for ourselves. And stress is something that can affect us on many different levels. So, for example, hormonally, stress can play havoc with our hunger hormone ghrelin and our satiety hormone leptin and our blood sugar regulating hormone insulin. And that's because cortisol, known as the main stress hormone or the fat storing hormone, really gets in there and interferes with these other hormonal pathways from the brain to the body. So when we have too much stress chemistry, cortisol, epinephrine, norepinephrine, these things are affecting the brain. They're actually damaging brain cells over a chronic period of time of stress being activated. And instead of the stress response kicking in for an acute response, something's happened, our body instinctively kicks in to protect us, to give us enough strength, power, and energy to fight or to flee. And then once it's been dealt with, we can revert back to a nice relaxed response. Because we're not actually having enough of that counter response of being in the relaxed response, we're operating from stress response most of the time. And these stress chemicals aren't supposed to be in the body for prolonged periods of time. And when they are in the body for chronic activation of the stress response over a period of time, it's damaging cells in the brain. It's interfering with human growth hormone, DHEA. It's interfering with our hunger and satiety signals. It's storing weight, it's storing fat in the body. And we're not making the most healthy choices because our brain can't think clearly enough when it's overloaded with these stress chemicals. So stress plays a major role, I think, in how we use food because hunger is a natural signal from the body to replenish the energy and information so that we can bring that food into our body. Our body has the best opportunity to break it down and assimilate the nutrients into the cells to then feed the brain, feed the cells of the body, and consistently monitor where are we at, where are we depleted, where do we need something more of. And I think our cravings aren't just emotional. Our cravings can be sometimes biochemical. The brain is trying to get what it needs for the body to survive and to keep us in a nice balanced state. But you throw stress into the mix, and we've got not only hormonal imbalance, biochemical imbalance, we've got emotional upset and imbalance. So our cravings then can be more the body trying to get what it needs, but it also can be the mind trying to get that pleasure hit of food for a short period of time to take us away from the discomfort or pain of an experience or of an emotion that's a bit too intense or a situation. And you've got all these different messages coming up at the same time trying to satiate that hunger in some sort of capacity. So sometimes we might be looking for nutrients, sometimes we might be looking for a sense of pleasure to take us away from that discomfort of pain, and sometimes we might be looking for comfort, we might be looking for love and belonging, we might be looking to feel significant, we might be looking to soothe ourselves, to distract ourselves, to comfort ourselves on some level. And different types of food will give us different sensations and feelings in the body, which will take us away from that pain of hunger or that pain of discomfort or challenge in life. And it will give us temporary pleasure of the things that we're really looking for. So I think a really good question to ask is, what am I really hungry for? What's missing? Not just what's missing in my diet, my food, but if I'm stressed, of course, I'm not going to be making the healthiest choices. But what am I really hungry for in what I need? In what I need to make me feel the things that I need to feel at the moment, whether it is safety, belonging, love, connection, growth, all those kinds of things.
Right. Well, a couple things about that. I think your explanation about the stress response was excellent because I think a lot of people hear that stress can, make you gain weight or prevent you from losing weight.
Mm-hmm.
And I think your explanation really kind of explains why and what happens in the body when you're stressed for long periods of time. I also think that, where you said just a few minutes ago about how when, to give yourself what you need, and sometimes when you go to food to kind of, give yourself comfort when you're feeling feelings of discomfort, I think a lot of people don't take the time to stop and say, well, what is it that I need? Is it food? Is it love? They just automatically go right to the food. So, I think, yeah, that's exactly right. So I've heard you talk about, meditation, mindfulness, and the response, how you could use that is it how you could use meditation and mindfulness as a response to those feelings?
Absolutely. Because what you're doing is, when you are moving from a stressed state, which is really your sympathetic nervous system activating a stress response, and that's activated really via your brain. There's a part of your brain, the amygdala, it perceives a danger or a threat to your life, and it will, without taking any chances, instigate that stress response immediately as an instinctive survival mechanism. And consciously, we're not even aware of what's going on before that body has responded. The body responds before the conscious mind actually thinks to catch up and say, well, is there actually anything I really need to be stressing about? So that response, that stress response, it's necessary. And there is such a thing as good stress, eustress. And that's necessary if we want to put ourselves into challenging situations, get up and speak in front of people, even though it's really nerve-wracking and making us feel very stressed. But there is such a thing as a positive stress response, and that is to help us overcome challenges and show ourselves what we're really made of, what we can do when we step up. But it's the chronic stress that's being activated consistently several times a day, that is what causes all of this damage and what can really get in the way of how we make our choices in food, how we choose to speak to people, whether it's unconsciously reacting, knowing people know how to press our buttons, or if we take that step back and actually consciously respond. And consciously responding is something that you have to do from a conscious place. But I think when we're constantly up in our head, being influenced by the chaos around us of modern day life and all the expectations that goes with it, we're constantly up in our head and we're activating this stress response because of thought of the past or the present or the future and things that we need to do or things that have already happened and going over and over and over it, which many of us do. And all of that is preventing us from actually being in the moment. Meditation and mindfulness bring us back into the moment, and often via the breath. So, for example, most people breathe into their chests and they raise up here. And that's sort of, if you think about when you get a fright or if you are holding back from really saying what you want to say, we kind of, and we tense and we tighten and we hold it all here. But if we actually breathe lower down into the lower lobes of the lungs, where we can take a greater amount of oxygen, what we're doing is breathing deeper. We're breathing using our diaphragm, we're massaging organs, we're moving lymph, and we are taking in a greater amount of oxygen, which is nutrients for every single cell in the body. So meditation and those techniques of relaxation take us into the equally opposite response of the stress response. So stress response this side, sympathetic nervous system; meditation over here, relaxation response, parasympathetic nervous system. So what we're finding in modern day life is that the sympathetic nervous system is our dominant response because we're so swept up and caught in daily life, making food choices and getting stressed out about when our jeans feel a little tighter in the morning and commuting to work, all of those things. But if we can spend more time in the meditative response or the relaxation response, if we can even just tune into our breath several times a day and start to be aware of where am I breathing, and drop from your head into your heart. Feel that air moving in through the nose, down the back of the throat and into the lungs, into the center of the body, and really expanding that space in your heart. You are bringing your conscious awareness into the moment, and you're giving your mind and your body a chance to just relax for a moment, to come into oneness, so that you can then ask yourself those really important questions. Who am I? What are my needs? What am I really hungry for? Is this what I'm really after right now? A packet of Tim Tams in the fridge? I don't know if Americans know what Tim Tams are. You may, but really just sort of asking ourselves, do I really need the Ben and Jerry's, for example? I know that's a famous ice cream over there.
Yeah,
but
it is.
Because if we don't bring ourselves into the moment, we're up in our head, and whatever's driving that thought process or that desire or that need in that moment to go to the cupboard or go to the fridge and get our favorite foods, whether they're comfort foods or not, just to take our mind off of the discomfort or the pain of that moment or that thought, then whenever we do that, we're unconscious. So it's almost like sometimes you might eat a whole bag of chips, you might eat a big bucket of ice cream and something else on a full-on binge, for example, and then you'll sort of sit there afterward comatose thinking, oh my God, what have I just done? I've just eaten all that food. And then all the guilt and the shame that's associated with that act comes into play, and we beat ourselves up even more with the same negative self-talk and thinking. And we put ourselves into a greater stress response that's activating more stress chemistry that is only driving us to feel and think in negative ways, that is going to lead to more negative behavior or more unhealthy behavior. So dropping into the moment, using breath, using meditation, using yoga, going for a walk, calling a friend even, going and having a bath, even going for a run. Some people might need to really shake off and get rid of that excess energy that the stress response is creating, and other people need to do something slow and soothing. So finding out what for you is the way that you need to go to really either get rid of it or breathe through it and let it flow through you, to come back into the moment so you can ask yourself those questions, is a really great starting point to try and figure out what's going to make me feel better, what actually is going to help me come into the moment right now, so that I can stop myself before I do that habit of coping, that I can really tune in and figure out, do I really need that, or what am I really seeking? What do I think that the bag of chips or the Tim Tams or the ice cream is actually going to do for me right now? What feeling am I trying to change and experience over what I'm currently experiencing? So bringing yourself into the moment might seem like it's going to be uncomfortable, But at the same time, if you can bring yourself into the moment to identify what you are feeling, which is something I think a lot of people just don't do. We find it very difficult to name our feelings because we don't like experiencing them because they're uncomfortable. But they're only uncomfortable for as long as they're there. So if we do eat over the top of them and distract ourselves or find other methods of coping, then it's not actually going to address the emotion to be able to process it, breathe through it and release it so that we can then make a more informed and conscious choice that hopefully would be a lot healthier for us in the short and long term.
Yeah, I mean, that's a way to bring full circle the mind body food connection is to really and meditation and mindfulness and just breathing into and giving yourself those few moments to to be in the moment and to kind of stop the action that you're about to take and kind of think it through a little bit as to is there something better you could do for yourself, or is this something that you really want to do? Is it hunger that you're feeling, or something else, and kind of put a stop in the moment, because I think that's the tough part for so many people. So that's a great way to kind of bring it together, to just to be able to take that pause and really center themselves and think about what it is that they want to do to kind of get them past the moment. And so I know you have a gift for everybody on an emotional eating triggers. So, if people know what their triggers are, they may be able to surpass and get past that moment because they know what's triggering them. So tell us about that workbook. That sounds like an amazing gift.
Okay, so this is actually a short little workbook. I think it's only 5 or 6 pages, but it's a workbook that I actually designed for my clients who were struggling with eating disorders, binge eating, emotional eating, and having come from that area myself, having got over my own eating disorder, I wish I had had something like this when I was going through it, because I was so in my head that I just didn't understand. A lot of my behaviors were driven from a place of discomfort, and I didn't know what I was after at that time. I was just going in a blank zone, doing the behavior, and then sort of coming to afterward, and really none the wiser after the fact. So this is a little worksheet that's designed to really ask you in that moment when you know you're about to go and reach for the fridge, go and reach for the cupboard, or find the hidden cookies under the bench, or get in the car and drive to the shop because you just have to have something. This is the moment. If you can bring yourself into the moment and remember, clap your hands, snap your fingers, whatever you need to do, come into the moment and really just first of all ask yourself, am I hungry? Am I actually hungry? Am I physically hungry? Or am I emotionally hungry? So once you've actually identified that, then if you're hungry, then okay, great, you're hungry. Honor your body's needs and give it what it needs to satiate itself till the next meal. If you're not physically hungry, then what's going on for you that you think food is actually going to satiate for you? And inquire. It's the set of self-inquiry questions that guide you through really identifying what is the real reason that I'm reaching for food right now. If it's not for physical hunger, what is it for? What's going on in my life today that I'm struggling with that's caused me stress, that I'm now finding very difficult to process, or I don't want to process it, that I think food is going to help me distract myself, push it down, or alleviate for a moment. And then it also includes a distraction action list. So a distraction action list is really helpful for moving from that pathway to this one, when you are identifying consciously, I'm not actually physically hungry, but the habitual process when I feel like this is to think these thoughts that make me feel even worse and make me behave in those ways and reach for food. So to get out of the habit, I've got a distraction action list with about 6 or 7 pre-written ideas to give you some distractions or actions to take. And then I've also included a couple of thought processes underneath that so that they can identify with a few examples. What is the self-talk that I'm going through at the moment? What am I saying to myself? And then what do I want to be saying to myself? Because I understand that's not helpful. And then creating a few new affirmations. So really it's sort of taking you through that whole conscious process of identifying hunger, what kind is it, and what do I really need, to the distraction and the action to take to satisfy that need, and then to look at the self-talk to start changing the self-talk so that you don't just pull yourself up consciously in that moment and do something differently, but you're also identifying the thought processes that got you in that place in the first place, so that when it happens again, you not only have a way to deal with it effectively with a distraction or an action, but you also have a new thought process to change it with that you can consciously put into practice. And generally over a period of time, it will become easier and easier to not even use the worksheet, because you'll know it'll be right there. Sometimes it might be a nutritional tweak, which is where you come in, to make a nutritional tweak earlier in the day that might be causing 3 p.m. cravings, for example. And sometimes once you've even taken care of that nutritional craving and made sure that the meals have been more balanced so that there's nothing lacking that come 3 p.m. your body's craving it, sometimes even when that's done, there still might be the habitual behavior. Oh, it's 3 p.m. I need to go and get the chocolate. So that's when this really comes into play to help you process that and work through it differently by being conscious.
Well, that sounds like a great gift. And if you hadn't clicked on the link when you received your email this morning announcing my interview with Viki, I suggest you go back and not miss that link, because it sounds like a great workbook that will be extremely helpful to everybody. So Viki, thank you so much for being here with us today. It was really great, and it was really like a wonderful discussion. And I think the listeners got so much out of this conversation. So I really thank you for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. Hopefully people have realized that it's not you. It's not that you're broken. It's not that you're not good enough. It's not that you are your eating disorder. You may have an eating disorder. You may struggle with emotional eating or binge eating, but it's not you. So find out who you are and use some of these tools and techniques to learn to become conscious and change those thoughts and feelings and behaviors according to how you are now, not pre-programmed thinking.
Terrific. That's a wonderful note to leave on. And thank you so much again, and until next time.
Find out more at mindbodyfood.net or study with us at mindbodyfoodinstitute.com.